Not sure if you've heard, but the Browns have a new starting quarterback this week. Dylan Gabriel has cleared concussion protocol, but it has been announced that Shedeur Sanders will start for the Browns this week regardless. So there's lots to talk about with regards to that. But you know us, we don't like to go in on specific newsy items. We like to talk about the underlying themes behind them here on the SumerSports show. And so, what we are going to talk about here today with a special guest who's going to join us in just a second, who knows a lot about this subject matter, is the concept of a backup quarterback or someone who has been a backup quarterback for a period of time, what it's like to step into that starter's role, be it in the middle of a game, be it with a week of starters reps under your belt. What kind of evaluation do we need to make? How do we need to change the way that we're watching the games? And how is their experience leading up to that time on the field different than someone who is named the starter at the beginning of the year? I'm Lindsay Rhodes. Sam Bruchhaus joins me as always, and we will be joined in just a little bit, Sam, by Luke McCown, who spent a lot of time in the NFL, largely as a backup, also had some experience as a starter, and he's going to tell us what his experience has taught him about the ways that we should view these situations.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation because something that we always talk about in the data community is base rates and setting expectations and understanding and evaluating how players are doing as compared to those expectations. And I think especially as Shedeur Sanders moves into his second game this year and some other teams start to look at making decisions about how to move on with their quarterback situation, it's really important to set those base rates so we can make good evaluations on them afterward.
Let's start with we'll peg the general subject around Shedeur Sanders, who is kind of a use case example that we have right in front of us here in the last few weeks. How did he do this week when he had a full week of starters reps? We will talk in a minute about, what happened for him when he went in the game when he wasn't expecting to be the starter. But how did it look yesterday against the Raiders?
Let's just start with the general box score. He went 11 for 20, so a 55% completion percentage, 209 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 1 sack. If you just look at the box score and you look at quarterbacks who did not start a game until week 8, and then had over 10 passing attempts in a game after that, it was almost exactly average, Lindsay. Typically, those quarterbacks are about 12 for 20, so about a 60% completion percentage, right around what we saw Shedeur do. And then they have somewhere around 200 yards, somewhere around a touchdown, somewhere around a pick. So a pretty standard backup game. A player who is coming in with 1 week of reps, hasn't really gotten reps prior to that. He was pretty average. In terms of our Sumer score, he was pretty solidly a backup jumping in there. So going a layer deeper, he was solidly performing as we would expect a backup to do in that situation.
When you say solidly performing as a backup would, what does that mean with regards to Sumer score?
So we have about 3 tiers that I wouldn't consider a quality start. And you start at the top, that's a rotational player. Typically, we see this more with the respect to defensive linemen or wide receivers who are kind of coming in and out of the game and not necessarily putting up home run appearances. With quarterbacks, it's a little different because if you're a starting quarterback, we get to really see you over the course of an entire game, over the course of 15 to 30 passing attempts. So Shedeur Sanders did have our lowest tier that we typically see amongst quarterbacks who play the entire game. He did have what we consider a marginal Sumer score. It typically identifies with guys who are coming in a backup situation. A couple guys who have had those types of performances this year. Dylan Gabriel has had a couple. Some of the other backups who have played this year have had a couple. And so
some of the starters who have played
correct,
at a backup level have also scored in this range before.
Precisely. And so when you start getting in what we would consider the third or the fourth tier out of 10, that typically means that if you're a starter, it's time to go elsewhere. And if you're a backup, we need probably another week or two to get a sense of what you really can do. And if you maintain that level, it's probably time to move in a different direction as well.
For people who are familiar with our numerical grading scale that we talked about 2 weeks ago on the show in great detail, it's a 10-1 scale, and he fell in at a 3. So that's
Right.
what we're actually kind of talking around here. How did this performance this week compare to the performance last week when he was thrown in without the week to prepare as a starter?
Yeah. So last week was a substantially worse outing. 4 for 16, 25% completion percentage, 47 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1 interceptions. That's just the box score. The Sumer score was substantially worse. Like it did not look good for him last week. That being said, I looked at the subset of quarterbacks who did not start a game, but did play in that game, and they had over 10 passing attempts going back many years. And they typically played a little bit better. You start to see about a 60% completion percentage. You don't really see on average them score a touchdown or get an interception. So last week was a pretty poor outing for him coming in relief. This week was about an average outing for what we would expect for a backup quarterback coming in with 1 week of reps.
Okay, what do the numbers, you kind of roughly stated what the average was for backups who were in their first start after having a week to prepare. Did the improvement, was that consistent with what we've seen from them after they came in for, half a game in that type of sample size? Was what we saw from him last week, I guess, consistent from what we would have expected to see from quarterbacks who are in that situation historically?
So it's difficult to say. Going back to about 2014, there has only been about 20 to 30 of these guys who have really been in that situation. Let's look at the high end. Let's look at what the guys who really knocked it out of the park. Really, the only guy who we've seen do it since 2019 has been Brock Purdy. And I think that is the best case scenario right now for Shedeur Sanders. And even in terms of Sumer score, we didn't really see Brock Purdy jump up to a quality starting level until his second year. Really what he was performing at was the level kind of that both Dillon Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders have performed at. And then by the end of the year, he was starting to put up kind of more rotational level, right around average games. You look at other players who have done this in the past. Spencer Rattler had he also had that rotational level around average, slightly below average Sumer score. He did not have any starter level games. Many of these other players, Aiden O'Connell, Tyson Bagent, Jaron Hall, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, DeVito, Zappi, Skylar Thompson, we really didn't see any of these players put up quality starts in terms of the passing game. So I think, going into week 13, 14, 15, if he's able to get even one quality start, one really, really good game, that would be a real victory for him above average of the scenario that he's kind of been in. Are the expectations going to be that? I don't know. People are getting really excited, even though, as I said, Lindsay, this was basically an average game with 1 week of reps. And so we'll see how it kind of maintains in the next couple weeks. But we typically haven't seen these guys go on to be starters. You really start going down all the way to 2014. Really, the only player that we've seen kind of take over a starting job has been Gardner Minshew, who has settled into a pretty good rotational quarterback, bridge quarterback or backup role at this point in his career.
We went through and we looked at quarterbacks who were drafted since 2014 till now.
Right.
Day 3 or later, right?
Yep.
I'm going to rattle off the names so you just have a rough idea of what we're talking about here. Because and the reason we did day 3 or later is because I think even quarterbacks that are drafted in the 3rd round, we can all think about conversations we have around draft time. People who are high upside, but maybe haven't proven that they're worth that 1st round pick. There's still some question marks attached to them. We still talk about taking them in the 3rd round, right? Like Milrow, like guys like that, who you're like, well, but there's so much something special here that but it's too risky for the 1st round. We'll talk about him as a 3rd round quarterback. So we wanted to frame this as guys that the league has kind of made an evaluation on in the draft process that said, you're not necessarily in our plans, but maybe it'll work, right? And I think that day 3 or later is probably a fair evaluation of like where to put those guys. So there's some of the names who have gone on to start multiple games that Aiden O'Connell, 4th rounder, Spencer Rattler, 5th rounder, Bailey Zappi's a 4th rounder, Sam Howell's a 5th rounder, Brock Purdy, notably 7th rounder, Gardner Minshew, 5th round, Jarrett Stidham was a 4th rounder, Joshua Dobbs was a 4th rounder, Dak Prescott, an anomaly in a bunch of different ways, which we can discuss. He was a 4th rounder. Trevor Simeon's a 7th rounder. Now listen to the number of undrafteds. There are as many undrafteds as day 3 guys that ended up starting games. Cooper Rush, PJ Walker, Nick Mullins, Kyle Allen, Jake Browning, Tyler Huntley, David Blau, Tommy DeVito, Tyson Bagent, and Heineke also fits into that bucket. So it's an interesting group of people here. And obviously there are some anomalies that are in that group, right? Like Dak Prescott has turned out to be a certainly a starter level starter, like a high-end starter, got paid, top of market, and then Brock Purdy fits into that category too. So it's, there are a lot of names there that you would say, well, maybe this isn't the best, like we're not chasing this here. If Shedeur Sanders turns out to be this, that's not good. But there are a couple of names there that you can hang your hat on and say, didn't always get it right in the draft. Let's welcome in Luke McCown now, who was a 4th round pick, 2004, Luke.
That's right. Thanks.
Ended up playing until 2015. Coincidentally, your first team was also the Cleveland Browns. I love that. The reason that we reached out to you is because you expressed a lot of thoughts that we wanted to dig deeper on this subject matter on Twitter last week. You're a perfect person to have this conversation with and to kind of add some context, right, surrounding the numbers that we just talked about, maybe why the numbers even turn out to be what they are. There are reasons that are not excuses, they're explanations behind that. And so we want to dig into that with you. First, though, those names that I just mentioned there, how easy do you think it is to spot the guys that evaluators got wrong? How quickly can we do that?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. Number one, because there's not a lot of time on task for those guys, right? You think about, the outlier, the one that is most easily brought up in this type of conversation is Tom Brady, right? And everybody goes, well, how in the world did somebody miss on that, right? And you go back to his college tape, and here's the thing that, and we'll circle around to this, I'm sure, with Shedeur, but the thing is, the first thing that's always looked at is traits, physical traits. And if you don't have physical traits, it's hard to stand out on tape. It just is, especially at being in high-level college football. If you don't have speed or size or arm strength or quickness, then when you're playing, let's just take Brady, for instance, out of Michigan, playing the likes of the Ohio States and so forth, your physical abilities are going to, or lack thereof, is going to be what's noticed. It won't be the opposite, right? And so that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. That's what's always recognized first. It's gotten a lot of general managers and scouting departments fired because you hang your hat on physical traits and you draft a guy like Jamarcus Russell who lacked the other intangibles. He had all the traits you could imagine, but I've said this. I said this going back to the draft. The thing that hurt Shedeur as far as where he went in the draft was the fact that he didn't have those special traits. He's extremely tough. He processes really well. By all accounts, he sees the field well, and he understands the game. All of those are high marks, and they get you drafted for sure, and they help you play at a certain level. But the traits are the things that scouts and GMs, decision makers look to first. And so if you don't have the traits, it's hard to measure everything else until you get somebody in the building, right? It's hard to measure Brock Purdy's processing power and his leadership ability and how quickly he can download information from Kyle Shanahan in practice and then spit it back out on the practice field or on the sideline in a game time adjustment, and then spit it back out on the field in real time, or how quickly he can he can calculate the blitz depth or the rotation or the a change up on a third down. All those things you can't see on tape. You don't really know about a player until he gets into your building. And so that's what makes it really difficult. Yeah, that's what makes it really kind of difficult to identify whether a late round pick or a free agent guy is going to be a guy that can step in and lead your team, for any amount of time, just because you don't get the only thing you get to see on tape is physical traits.
What kinds of traits specifically do you think are the ones that we're talking about here that maybe Shedeur, just as an example, did not have? Because it feels almost weird to me in 2025. Like, I get the rushing ability and like a big, strong, like I can withstand, like it's hard to bring me down, like a Ben Roethlisberger, Josh Allen type. You need a strong enough arm to get the ball down the field, but it feels like everybody does to a degree. And that really the hardest thing to find is that processing ability and the ability to get the ball where it needs to be at all times.
Yeah, so physical traits are always going to be a scout's number one thing that he looks for. Does he have an overwhelming arm? And then within that, does he have all the pitches in his bag, right? Can he throw, for lack of a better analogy, can he throw the changeup? Does he have the touch? Does he have the intermediate throws? Some guys can hammer it down the field, but they don't have the intermediate ball, the touch throw that Shedeur has. Like you saw the one he rolled out to Judy that ends up getting stripped for a fumble yesterday. He has those throws, but he doesn't have the overpowering arm that a Cam Ward does. And those are the differences. And it's funny to say because I finished my career playing behind the guy that I think is the best ever play, the position in Drew Brees, and he didn't have an overwhelming arm. Albeit I think that early in his career he had a better arm than people gave him credit for. But it's funny that here we are so far into this, understanding, how to evaluate quarterbacks that we hang our, that we hang our hat so much on arm strength. While it plays a huge role, it's not the end all be all. But the fact remains is that that's where most scouts go. Like, that's why Anthony Richardson was drafted where he was drafted, because he dropped back in the facility and hit the top of the, while the ball was still going up, he hit the roof. And you would say that everything else about his career, 13 starts in college, didn't really have that impressive of a resume regarding stats in college in those 13 starts. Those things would have said, yeah, he's uber talented, generationally talented, but he's lacking the requisite things, the other things required to play football at a high level in the NFL, right? So that's what I mean. Traits can get you in trouble just as much as they can, you miss on them. And so I would say the arm strength is probably the biggest thing. And then yes, the way that the game has gone, everybody sees the game through the eyes of a Lamar Jackson or a Josh Allen or even a Patrick Mahomes, who's not fast or overly athletic by any stretch of the imagination, but he's got a sixth sense with how he uses his mobility. And it's really unique. If it wasn't so unique, then slow guys everywhere would be able to do the same thing he does, and they can't. So the abilities to create and with quickness, with agility, those things all play a part. And I think those are the reasons why Shedeur probably was drafted where he was at. And you can look at, you brought it up in the opener, Jalen Milroe, right? He was probably drafted in the third round because of his traits, because of his unique abilities to run 4.3 and to be strong and the quickness that he has. And somebody looks at the baseline of his throwing ability and goes, you know what? He's got enough there that we can work with. We feel good about who we have as far as quarterback coaches in the building, that we feel like we can elevate that part of his game. And so it becomes, it's who's watching him, who's evaluating him, and how do they see it fit into their system.
So in particular, in your rookie year, you've been evaluated by the scouts and you're coming in and you are not starting. What does a normal week look like for you as compared to some of the starters, and how are you using your cognitive traits to kind of pick up on what it would take to then make the jump on just a normal game week? Yeah, right. So my rookie year, okay, I was drafted with the Browns in the 4th round of 2004, and in arguably the best draft class that's ever been outside of the 82-83 draft class with Marino and Elway and those guys. And so, but I was a 4th round pick. Jeff Garcia and Kelly Holcomb were my two guys that were ahead of me, right? And so Kelly was a 10-year vet at that time. Jeff had Pro Bowls under his belt with San Francisco. And so I really had the opportunity to kind of watch two different guys in different points of their career with different journeys that they traveled. Now, Jeff came over from Canada,
right? Kelly was an undrafted guy that made it 10 years in Indianapolis. So I got to see kind of, okay, what does it take to like not be a first round pick? You know, and I always said this, like, I felt it was so stupid that the Browns labeled a 4th round pick the future, you know, quarterback of the future. That's the most ridiculous thing ever. And there was articles written and all this other stuff. It's so silly. Why would you write that as a 4th round pick? And yet,
why didn't you take me earlier?
And how why didn't you take me earlier if you thought I was the future, right? Oh. But I got to watch Kelly and how he approached the game as an undrafted guy, and it certainly wasn't about physical ability for Kelly, and he would tell you that it wasn't about physical ability. It was about, he was very much like a Brock Purdy. It was about how quickly he processed the game, and then playing within himself with limited arm talent and all the other things, but being accurate with the football and getting the ball out. So. I knew that was what it was going to take for me as a player, and it was just about how I learned to do that. And so film study was a big deal, obviously, but your reps, and this is kind of where it's coming full circle. Your reps in practice don't come with the first team or even the second team as a third stringer, right? Kelly and I switched out reps in scout team, and we did it on kind of a competition wise. We did it based on, it's kind of like a make it take it in basketball, where if you complete the ball, you get to keep playing it. If it's an incomplete, you get to come sit down, right? And so that kind of helped me learn, you know what, you got to make the right play. It's not just about the biggest play, but you got to make the right play if you want to stay in the game. And it turns out that that's kind of the way that my career went. I didn't have all these starts, but when the opportunities came, in the preseason and in spot duty with some starts here and there, that it was about the right play. It wasn't about being all world. It wasn't about, you know, proving that I could be a Pro Bowler or whatever else. It was just proving that I could make the right play. And so learning how to take those reps in scout team and translate them into the offense that you're running. Because everybody talks about a copycat league, right? But you have to translate the offense that you see on a card that's drawn up on a picture running against your defense, and then translate it into your offense and how your footwork might look and how your read might go. And I said this last week, oftentimes that's even better than the reps themselves in practice, because you're getting to practice against the starting defense all the time. You're getting to practice against 11 starters. No, they're not my plays. It's not necessarily my footwork, but I'm getting to learn the speed of how things work and when I can make this throw and when I can't make this throw. And so I think that's the important thing for undrafted, late drafted guys that aren't getting the reps. And important to understand how valuable those scout team reps are.
On the most basic level, how many quarterbacks get reps with the actual offense and how many go to the scout team? How does that work?
So my last 4 years, I would go months without a rep on our offense. I mean, months. Now, I was a veteran player by that time, but it was very much the case of if Drew wanted the reps or didn't want the reps is the only time and most of those were like walkthrough. Like they're not full speed reps. If it's a full speed rep, Drew was taking it. When I was in Jacksonville with David Garrard, David needed those reps. David needed those reps getting ready for the game. And again, I wasn't quite as established at that moment. I mean, my years were 6, 7, and 8 in Jacksonville. When I got to Atlanta and backing up Matt Ryan, I didn't see any reps unless it was the bye week. I didn't see any reps. Matt took them all. And so super important. Usually only one guy is getting meaningful reps. And when I say meaningful, it's like, well, this rep is going to help me prepare. And somebody may say, well, you know, at the place I was at, we got 2 reps at the end of a period, whatever. That's fine. That's not a meaningful rep. Like, I don't care what you say. Give a guy 2 reps at the end of a period is not a meaningful rep. That doesn't help him any more get ready for a game than having no reps at all. I need to have all reps to really feel like I'm prepared for a game. So I would just as much go, hey, no, give those 2 reps at the end of where I'm handing the ball off or I'm getting to throw a screen, which is a lot of time what those were. And you go, hey, you got your 2 reps. Man, give those to the starter and let me just focus on the scout team.
So the transition to being the starter, especially, midweek or in the early part of the week. What is the difference in your preparation? Obviously, at that point, you have all the reps, it sounds like. Is there a difference in the way that you are exercising the mind, exercising the body? Like, what's kind of transition to being the starter?
Yeah, well, the sexy answer is there shouldn't be, right? Like you hear backups say,
right.
Well, I'm preparing to be the starter all the time. And it is like if you're a good backup, if you're a guy that takes your job seriously, then I learned about the second half of my career as a backup that I literally stood 4 yards behind the guy that was taking the rep, and I mimicked his motion. Like I stood in the huddle, I got the play, I imagined myself calling the play in the huddle. I stood right beside Sean Payton when he was giving the play in practice to Drew, and Drew would run to the huddle. I'd run right next to Drew as if I was doing it. And then Drew would break the huddle, walk up to the line of scrimmage, and I would stand 4 or 5 yards behind Drew. I remember Aaron Cromer, our offensive line coach, when I got to New Orleans, was like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. It's like, buddy, it's how I'm getting reps. I'm sorry. But I was Drew's shadow, and that's how I prepared. When I became the starter, it was much more about the fine details of let me get with Brandon Cooks, let me get with Darren Sproles, let me get with Jimmy Graham, let me get with those guys to understand now more about how they see the ball coming out, right? Because the stature from a Dylan Gabriel, and I don't mean this derogatory, Dylan Gabriel at 5'10" to Shedeur Sanders at 6'2", the ball coming out from behind the line of scrimmage is different for the guys that are turning to find it. When it was Drew and then it was me, the ball coming out of my hand was different than they've seen it for all their time. So what was important in the reps and the preparation was I go to those guys so that they're comfortable in the timing and the way that the ball comes out of my hand so that they can see it. Here's how they like to catch it, understanding their splits on a certain route that they like to take. Jimmy on a drift post or, Darren Sproles on a wheel route. They have their little nuances, and now I've got to catch up to the way that their body language communicated with Drew now so that I can read it well, right? And so that's probably the biggest thing. Hopefully it's not necessarily the preparation of the film study, the understanding of the game plan, but it's understanding your guys and the guys you're playing with now. That, to me, was the biggest change. Now, it may not be as big of a difference when you've got Dylan who started, 8 games or whatever, and Shedeur in 1. They haven't had that years of experience, right? But to me, that's the biggest difference is the other 10 guys going to playing with a certain guy and the way the ball comes out. And in particular, let's talk about a left-handed spin spiral and a right-handed spinning spiral. That's way different for a receiver to catch, way different. And so those things are super important to build that continuity in the team when a backup is taking over midway through the season.
Have you ever read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell?
No, I haven't. I have not. It's on the list.
So I recommend it. There's a part in the beginning where they're talking about sports and youth sports, and it talks about how there are, like, when a kid is identified very early because when he's 7 and he makes an all-star team, then that player who is better at the age of 7, usually because he's older. And there's a whole section in there about ages. And it's like, if you are close to the cutoff or you're one of the olders, your development, there's such a big difference between, months at that age. And so then you've been identified as being good. At that point, now you get to be on All-Stars, and now you get a whole All-Star season where you get extra coaching, and it becomes like a self-perpetuating type of evaluation. Yeah. Like now that guy does become the best not because he is literally the best or was always meant to be the best, but because he was the best right at the beginning, and you now get all of the benefits from having been that from here until eternity. It feels like there is something in play with regards to that too, with draft evaluation. Like if you come in and you have been identified very early on, now this is much further on down the road, right? But I'm just saying as a premise, it feels similar. Yeah. If you come in and you're a first rounder, you get all of our tools thrown at you. you will succeed. If you're going to succeed, you're going to have every opportunity to succeed. Whereas if you have not met that initial evaluation, the hole you have to climb out of to succeed, you have to be more outstanding than everyone
100%.
who is drafted above you in order to get an opportunity. Does that make sense to you as
100%.
as an anecdote
100%.
here?
Really? So the side bar to that, the side note to that would be that at some point in the season, so I started my rookie year week 12, 13, 14, and 15, okay, with the Browns. And I threw 4 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. In that same span of time, Eli Manning, who was the number 1 pick, threw 4 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, or 6, but it was very, very close. I got traded the next year, and so to your point, that's exactly how it works, and that's why it's hard to be a career backup. That's why it's hard, because you don't get the extra opportunities. That's why it's hard to be a late round pick, I should say, because you don't get the extra opportunities. You get 1, maybe 2 showings, and if you don't produce, they kind of go, well, yeah, we'll go find somebody else next year.
I want to ask you with regards to Shedeur, because I know that you're on a time crunch here and we could talk to you all day. So we'll be very careful with the time that we have you for.
All good.
The Shedeur situation strikes me as a very interesting one moving forward. And I think that there is some calculus that's already happened with the Dillon Gabriel being cleared from concussion protocol. They have to make a decision about Shedeur Sanders for the rest of the season, in my mind, because to a degree, Dillon Gabriel as a 3rd round pick, regardless of what he's done so far, they're invested in him. He'll be back next year.
Yep.
They're going to have to make a decision about whether or not they need to draft another quarterback next year,
Totally
right?
agree.
And if they draft another quarterback, then which one is the odd man out? I kind of feel like we are looking at Shedeur Sanders down the stretch being in a position where he needs to either win the starter's job or maybe he's playing for a position.
Yeah, I agree.
Like it doesn't feel like there's anything in the middle here.
No, I 100% agree. And per Shedeur's attitude and the way that he goes about it, you know, he's very confident. He kind of understands that, you know, this is a big opportunity for him. He said it multiple times this week. But I think that he understands, hey, if it's not here, I'm auditioning for somebody else as well.
Right.
And that's not to say that he won't, but listen, he's the most talked about, most watched, most polarizing quarterback that may have ever come into the NFL. And it's kind of odd that it's a 5th round pick. But I mean, I don't know what the ratings were of the game yesterday, but I'm sure they were way up there for their game. And so I think you're spot on. I think that he's either confirming what perhaps Cleveland hopes, in that he was indeed better than a 5th round pick and they got lucky, or you're right and it's going to be okay, but maybe not good enough to go, well, we're going to pass up on drafting a guy in the 1st round next year. And well, we don't want to have now 2 second-year players and a rookie. So, like, how's that going to shake itself out? And Deshaun Watson, by the way. So how's that going to shake itself out? Somebody's the odd man out. And if Shedeur can play and show, and he doesn't have to be great. That's what he doesn't have to be all world. He doesn't have to be. He just needs to show that he can progress and get better. The biggest takeaway from yesterday was the fact that he didn't drift back in the pocket, and he didn't take meaningless deep sacks. Oh, that was huge. That's a huge win for him, right? He got the 1 sack on the day, he got the ball out, he threw it away. I think he had 4 throwaways in the game. That's a big deal. And so how can I progress through that, right? And so I agree 100%. I think he's either going to confirm what they hope he is, or he's going to play well enough that somebody else goes, hey, we want to give you a 5th round pick for him. And Cleveland's not out anything now. Or we want to give you a 3rd round pick, or we want to give you a 6th round pick for him, and he can come and be a guy on our team.
It needs to make that real hard for them to take anything and risk him turning into a fully functional starter for another team for Cleveland. This feels like we've got some important weeks in the weeks ahead. Luke McCown, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Everybody go follow him on Twitter, where he's been sharing a lot of these types of thoughts. It's Luke_McCown. And that's obviously 2 C's in succession there. I know that you've got to meet some of the nicest people on Twitter in the last couple of weeks since you started sharing some of these thoughts.
I love them. I love them. Listen, it is sincere and heartfelt, and I really do. I don't, there will be those that quit back with, what do you know, you threw for this many yards or whatever. And I love it. I understand what my career was and how blessed I was to be for 13 years, and I don't take any offense to it. It's all fun for me, and I hope those that I talk to understand that it's all in love and it's all in fun, and I enjoy telling about my experience and teaching people, kind of giving them a glimpse, behind the curtain, so it was, as it was into the NFL. So yeah, I enjoy the heck out of it.
Well, God bless you for not taking offense, because I take offense for you from some of those comments. You're a bigger person than I, Luke McCown. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Love it. Anytime, guys. Thanks so much.
So, Sam, that was interesting. I feel like these next few weeks in particular, just staying with the Shador, are going to be very, very interesting, because I think the more that I think about it, the more that I'm convinced that he either proves he's the starter or he plays his way off the roster.
Yeah, I agree. And I think something Luke said that really piqued my interest, I wrote it down immediately, was that he doesn't have to be all world. All he has to do is have a level of consistency. And that's a true I meets the AI thing, where we mentioned Brock Purdy at the top of the pod. Like, Brock Purdy just showed that he was going to give you a floor at the end of at the end of that year, his rookie year. And I think that served as the platform to, number one, have to keep him on the team. Number two, make him at least someone that the 49ers wanted to keep in their plans. And thus he becomes a player who challenges for an MVP 2 years ago, is a certified starting quarterback in this league and making a lot of money. And I think that's the biggest thing that people got to lock in on, is the level of consistency that Shador shows in the next couple of weeks is the key item. He doesn't have to have the huge throws. He doesn't have to have, these awesome games, but the level of consistency, and moreover, the consistency of the offense, is the true key. And I think Luke highlighted that really well.
So I want to push back on that just a little bit, because you told us earlier that he turned in a Sumer score of 3 this past week.
Yes,
so to a degree, my question is, if he is consistent with regards to what he did on Sunday, is that enough? Are we looking for that type of consistency? Or are we looking for consistency, meaning slightly improving on a week-to-week basis, so that the arrow is pointing up and we can see that this is moving in a direction that is good?
Yeah, that's a better way to frame it. I think we have to see him reach a level of, maybe the 20th best quarterback in the league or the 25th best quarterback in the league. He has to establish that floor. But once that floor is established, we want consistency in that range. And again, a consistent incremental success. And I also like how Luke highlighted that the real one victory in this past week, even though he did put up, that 3 Sumer score, was that there was only 1 sack. And going back, to Jackson State, sacks was his major issue. And we saw him manage that pretty well against a defensive front that did have Max Crosby and a couple other good pieces on it. So I think if he can keep that and add one other thing this week and one other thing the next week, that's the progression that we want to see from him to ensure that he's in the Browns' plans.
There's it's tricky. I feel like teams are in such weird positions when it comes to quarterbacks. And I fully understand everything that you're saying. And I think that that's the right way to evaluate him.
Right.
There is also a scenario where you're like, if you have a quarterback that is just good enough, but we're not seeing any signs that there's something there that's going to be the, I steal Daniel Jeremiah's tractor or trailer analogy quite a bit, right? Like, are you the guy who's going to pull the offense along with you? There's lots of quarterbacks that are examples of that in the league. Josh Allen, everybody's like, get him some wide receivers. He's clearly a tractor, right? And then there are other quarterbacks who I think are good enough, but maybe they're trailers. Maybe you need the environment to be good around you. It feels like if there is no evidence that there is a tractor in place, then it's a tough spot for the team, because if you get a guy who's good enough that you're not going to move on from him, but maybe is never going to become that guy who's like a high level guy, that's how mediocre teams stay mediocre, in my opinion, right? Because in my opinion, I would almost rather have a clearly good quarterback or a clearly bad quarterback. Like that middle of the road feels like the toughest spot to put a team in.
Right. And I think that's probably why we're sitting here on Monday and Shedeur Sanders is the quarterback in advance of Dylan Gabriel. It's because Dylan Gabriel, while he's never going to hurt you. He's not going to take sacks. He's not going to make bad throws, but he's never going to really help you and put you over top on a team who right now their two top wide receivers are big play wide receivers, Jerry Jeudy and Isaiah Bond. And then you're working with two tight ends kind of in more of the intermediate areas. Obviously not the most receiving talent on earth as a result of that. So you need someone who can at least give you an explosive or two a game. And I think that Shedeur gave them 2 explosives, and they hadn't really seen that level of explosive play in the weeks that Dylan Gabriel was playing. And I think that's the real difference right now is how they can spread out the distribution, particularly for their offense, and see if they can get a person who can consistently generate explosive at perhaps the cost of a sack or 2 a game.
This moving away from Shedeur for just a second, although he is an example of this also, I think one of the things that Luke talked about that was so interesting is just the way we evaluate backup quarterbacks in this situation in general. Like I mean, and there's no other way to do it, right? Like this is the only time that we're getting a chance to see them on the field. And so all we can do is evaluate the few reps that they have, whether they're coming into a game after the starter gets hurt. And after listening to what he talked about there, which is something that you and I both already know, like the amount of preparation that quarterback is getting when you turn to them and go, you're in.
Yeah.
Like, and we've heard stories for the last couple of weeks, guys who have been in that situation that were like, okay. And yet know that they're going in completely set up to fail. And this is going to be a disaster. It's a system that doesn't necessarily prepare those people well at all. And you have talked about something called the loser's curse.
Right.
And I kind of think I use the outliers analogy. I think the loser's curse also applies here.
Well, I think it definitely applies in the case of the Browns as well, because the Browns were a team who had the number 2 pick in the draft. And so Luke mentioned that why are you labeling your 4th round, your 3rd round and your 5th round quarterbacks, the quarterbacks of the future, when you already were quality in the loser's curse zone, where even if you did add a quarterback at pick 2, you're already subject to the loser's curse. And I think we're seeing that in 2 ways really right now, because neither of these quarterbacks were pegged to be the quarterback. This was a offense that was designed for, at the time, Kenny Pickett and Joe Flacco, both of which garnered them trade compensation as a result. So they moved away from them. And now kind of you're in a situation that wasn't exactly built for you. It settled around Dylan Gabriel, and it was built around some principles that they started to see at least some baseline of success or some baseline of consistency with. Now we move that to Shedeur Sanders, and it's already week 12, and the odds are certainly stacked against you, whether that's in terms of personnel, whether that's in terms of the game plan. And another just like minor item, one of the things that really sets the best apart, you mentioned Drew Brees. We saw it from Matthew Stafford on Sunday as well, is like red zone passing and the ability to complete passes in the red zone in tight spaces. We didn't really see that from Shedeur Sanders because Kevin Stefanski instituted a Wildcat package with Quinshon Judkins that was really effective. And thus, that was what they went with in the red zone. And so he couldn't really be evaluated on that outside of practice as a result. And so there's all these little caveats that kind of play into this flywheel of you're a backup. Okay, you get a couple starter reps, but it's probably not a good situation if either the quarterback is injured or you're not playing well. Then it doesn't look great in a game or 2 because the odds are stacked against you, and then you're back in that backup scenario as well.
I know you referenced what Josh McCown said that was applied to him as far as like quarterback of the future 4th rounder. In this particular case, I just want to, from my perspective, I don't think that the Browns are saying that at all or have said that about Dylan Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders. I think that my evaluation of this was that they read this quarterback class and they were like, nobody is worth a 1st round pick in terms of where we're picking. So we're going to move off of that. And then we'll take some shots later and we'll put them on the field if we put them on the field. And if they turn out to be studs like Brock Purdy or Dak Prescott, where we essentially get like a free quarterback in the 5th round or the 3rd round in Dylan Gabriel's case, then awesome. That's great. And if not, then we just cycle back and we do this again next year when maybe there's a better class. And so I kind of feel like going back to, again, you have to climb out of this hole. Like you are
Right.
stuck like way down here. That initial evaluation is so massive because you have to disprove
Right.
what they already think as opposed to just prove something.
Yeah.
Like disproving what someone already thinks is a much harder thing to do.
Yeah. And I think it's extremely unique in the case of Shedeur Sanders in particular, in a way, at least as it pertains to the media or the consensus. And as a data scientist, I take a lot of stock typically in the consensus big board. And I think that Shedeur, number one, in terms of the consensus and what we've heard in the media and the sheer gap between where he was rated prior to the draft and where his draft position really was, is kind of unprecedented, especially when there's no like real off the field or injury concern. And then secondarily, you have a quarterback that was selected prior to him in the third round, who was the flip. He was picked substantially higher than his consensus big board position. So typically you're a front office trying to prove why you took a player higher.
Mhm.
And in a very strange flip of the script, the Browns are trying to prove why they picked a player later, because in essence, everyone thought he was way higher. And so there's like all these weird kind of elements to this particular scenario, but frankly, they could all be quieted just by him making consistent plays. And so I think a lot of the preparation stuff that Luke went through, they're going to have to see that on the coaching end. Hopefully that turns into some production on the field as well.
Okay, week 13, we've got the Niners for Cleveland.
It's an interesting matchup. That defense is banged up. They've had some struggles getting to the quarterback. And obviously, if he can continue the management of the pocket as a result through that, it's tough, because you really look at this Cleveland Browns team, Lindsay, and the holes that they have are the holes that are most correlated to quarterback play, which is the line and the wide receivers.
Yeah.
If Shedeur Sanders was a safety, he'd probably look great right now, no matter what, because Myles Garrett's playing really well. They have several rookies playing really well, but he's not. He's the most important position in football, the quarterback position. And it feels like they're going to use a lot of that draft capital that they've accumulated on wide receivers and on the on the offensive line position this year. So it's truly a unique scenario for Shedeur Sanders, and probably an even more unique scenario for the Cleveland Browns for the next couple of weeks.
What is interesting too, though, when we talked about them potentially, if they decide that he's not going to be their starter, and then they maybe are looking to move him, because I just can't see them drafting a quarterback and then also keeping Dillon Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders.
Right.
That just doesn't make sense in terms of a quarterback room for me, because now you're just burying at least one of them. Like, done, no chance. So then I look to the list of guys that I mentioned earlier, and I think it is notable that there is no one on the list of guys since 2014 that was drafted or undrafted after the fourth round that has been traded and went on to be successful. There are guys who have been traded who have started for huge stretches, like Joshua Dobbs went for a stretch where he was like certainly good enough. Sam Howell's original starting was with his original team, right? I mean, there are guys here.
Sam Howell ends up getting traded.
Example.
He hasn't really played, but like that would the best case scenario, if they don't love Shedeur Sanders, I guess, would be Sam Howell, where like you're able to receive some draft compensation back as a result. We haven't, but like you said, we haven't really
buried on that depth chart too, in all likelihood.
I mean, yeah, we haven't really seen Howell play at all since his time in Washington. So you as a player, it's not ideal. As a team, I guess it kind of is ideal.
I wish there was someone on that list that we could point to. We were like, that team made a mistake on that guy.
Yeah.
Right? Like a Gardner Minshew. Like, ooh, they traded him, and boy, that turned into something for the Raiders, but it didn't. And by the way, since we've talked a lot about Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, I think, is the reason that I mentioned in the beginning that he's an anomaly here is because he was always the starting quarterback. So even though he was a fourth rounder, Tony Romo got hurt in training camp. So Dak Prescott, as the next man up on that roster, stepped into that starting role and always got starters reps. So he always had the benefit of the team looking at him for as long as he was there practically. We're talking about like a period of weeks where he didn't have
Right.
this, where they were like, you're our guy, you get the full benefit of our resources. And that's not true for anybody else on this list.
Yeah, and I think that's the the biggest struggle because again, like we're looking at these 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round picks. And if you're already looking at the draft curve and you're looking what the type of draft compensation typically goes for, like these players have or should not be, if everything is efficient and the scouting departments are doing their jobs, they really shouldn't be starting level players, period. But you compare that to where, you know, he was consensus rated, and that adds in a whole nother context of quarterbacks that, you know, some of which are starting right now. And so it's just like a really interesting data decision. And it's frankly going to be the first time that we're going to get a sense of a true massive difference at the quarterback position of the kind of draft season chatter and what that ends up doing and settling at versus what actually happens in the draft versus what actually ends up happening on the field. And so this is a really anomalous situation, I think. But I think the best case scenario from the base rate, which is the whole point of this podcast, Lindsay, is like to say that no one's really ever done this. And I think the only quarterbacks who have kind of made a real go of it is probably Spencer Rattler. And is this a success for the Browns? If Shedeur Sanders, if you take the name off, if you take the last name off the back of his jersey, is it a success if he ends up like Spencer Rattler? I think you could probably trade Spencer Rattler to a team right now, given what he has put on film. Or does it have to be this, you know, knock it out of the ballpark, all of a sudden he's a starter in order for this to be a success? I'd argue from a sheer data perspective, if he is, you know, a rotational level quarterback, that's a real success for a 5th round draft pick. But that's not the reality of the situation.
And that is definitely not the conversation that we're
Definitely
hearing
not.
Sam Bruchhaus, I'm Lindsay Rhodes. Thank you to Luke McCown for making time on a rainy day, wherever he was, man. The sound of the rain on the car. Maybe it's the Southern California girl in me. I find that sound so soothing. Maybe people who live in areas where there is more weather do not find that soothing.
I know Luke's the East Texas guy, went to Louisiana Tech, so I'm familiar with it. Sounded like there was a hailstorm, man. So that's how it goes at the end of the fall down south. So.
All right. Well, it's a big holiday week, so I hope you all have a good rest of the week. Get a chance to take a break and think of all the things that you're thankful for. Among the things I am thankful for, a very, very smart co-host in Sam Bruchhaus, who has all of the data-driven answers that feed the questions that I have, and Matt Stopsky, who is behind the glass, as they say, who's an outstanding colleague for both of us and teammate with which to work here at SumerSports. Thankful for all of you watching as well. Hope you guys have a wonderful week, get a chance to spend some time with people that you love, and we'll see you again next week.